Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, we're going to review the 1-0 win over Wolves on opening day for United. Talk about the Maguire deal that looks like it may be falling through and all of the scenarios that go with that, as well as talk about midfield options and a few other things. So let's get into it. All right, so obviously United finally kicked off the season with the final game of the weekend with a 1-0 win over Wolves. And obviously this was not a very good game. It was not the game I think most of us expected going into it based on, our feelings about the team and preseason and just the quality that we are expecting to see. Where to start with this in terms of what's actually worth talking about? I think that in some ways there's too much being spoken about the game in terms of how it was and what was wrong. Some people, there's a lot of talk about like it being just totally wrong and totally bad. But there's been a lot of talk of the midfielders, a lot of talk of strikers. So let me give just my perspective on it, how I saw the game. Number one, first and foremost, I think the biggest issue is fitness. United were second best to everything. Every duel, they were second best. The intensity was lacking. They were second best every loose ball. They were second best every aerial duel. They were second best every physical duel. They looked slow in comparison. Every player was getting caught by their essentially other person on the Wolves side. So in terms of an individual battles, I thought we lost almost every individual battle, outside of, a few like Wan-Bissaka tackles, last-ditch tackles and things like that. I thought we lost most of the individual battles. And that's obviously number one in the Premier League, how you lose or how you kind of struggle. You can have the better quality, the better players, the better system, but you can lose all the individual battles if the intensity and the fitness isn't there. And I think that was severely lacking. So I think that closed door friendly is good because obviously it gets more fitness. But, one of the things I think Erik ten Hag has to take responsibility for is preseason was kind of a joke. In my opinion, I've said this before, it was kind of a joke. We had 7 games and played the first 11 0 times. That starting 11 did not line up together once. The closest was Lens, obviously, with Wan-Bissaka instead of Dalot, yesterday. So it was close. That was it. That was the only game even remotely close to that starting 11 playing. And it's weird to me because if you look at past preseasons, we played close to the starting 11 most games. 60, 70, 80, 90 minutes, keep pushing their fitness, right? It was a 45 minutes and then a full change, and then they play 60, and then they play 80. There's no match fitness in this team. This team has no match fitness. And I think it's a bit of an error. Like I said, there's a lot of talk about the whole Dublin and Lens thing where they played the first team in Lens and then not in Dublin, but you had the same issue in Las Vegas. We lined up with, it was expected to be the final US game. There was 4 days in between. They'd done a lot of training. Get that first 11 cooking again so that they can play again at the weekend, Lens or Dublin, before the season. Get that fitness working. They came on 30, 25 minutes left in a mishmash of players. And I think that Ten Hag has to take some responsibility for that because I think the choices made over preseason are a lot of what we saw yesterday in terms of lacking match fitness. They all looked like they didn't lack match fitness. I mean, the only player who ever looks fully fit is Bruno Fernandes. That's pretty much it. I thought everybody else did not look match fit. Even Wan-Bissaka, who's one of the fitter players that we have, up and down the pitch, was doing a lot, but by 60 minutes, he was gassed and players were getting by him. And he just physically couldn't keep up anymore. and that's an issue. Match fitness. So that would be number one, because that can explain almost anything when you're slow and behind and not keeping up with what's going on. In the Premier League, you kind of can't afford that. Number two is, I think that a lot of people are piling on players like Mason Mount, Marcus Rashford down the middle, etc. But if you rewatch the game, you can watch the first 10 minutes and you actually can get a pretty clear picture of what was going on and what the Wolves' strategy was, which was to essentially play 4 midfielders like they did, condense the field centrally, block off the passing lanes to Mount, to Rashford, where they had often 2 men around them, and leave Antony and Garnacho on the wings. And unfortunately, yesterday, I think both of them were very, very, very poor. In the first 10 minutes, there was, I think, 7 sequences where the ball went to Garnacho or Antony, and they made poor decisions and lost it without even a good attempt. And it was every single possession. There was one possession between about 2 minutes and 3.5 where it was one long possession where it kept going to Garnacho and getting lost and recovered, and going to Garnacho and getting lost and recovered, and going to Garnacho and getting lost and recovered in the same sequence over and over. And you could see that essentially a lot of what Wolves were doing was let the wingers have the ball, and they did nothing with it. They were not able to produce a threat. And a lot of the central players were blocked off. And then obviously we're super open on the counter, but for me it's like this is part of the danger, right? If we're going to play this 2-8 system where Mount is going to be constantly making runs forward, and he did. I watched again, in the first 10 minutes he made about 6 runs into that back line or beyond it, and received the ball 1 time from Casemiro, which ended up going out for a corner actually, which was a good pass. That's the only time he actually got that ball attempted to him. Every other time it was a run that was not looked for. And Rashford didn't make as many, but it was the same thing. If your 8s are going up, your wingers can't lose the ball. And what kept happening is Mount would run forward, Shaw would even come forward into the midfield, Bruno comes forward, and then a winger loses the ball, or takes a shot that reflects back, or makes a pass backwards, and then they have to run back in their way behind the play. And I think, like, if you watch Pep do a system with 2-8s, there's a reason he likes Jack Grealish, but there's something he demands of his wingers. When his midfielders come forward, do not lose the ball. Like, it's like rule number 1. When your midfielders come forward, don't lose the ball. That ball has to go forward, right? You have to retain possession, or that ball has to go forward. You've got to try to make that pass, so at least the player is where the ball is, not well behind the ball, and the ball is headed towards your goal, and your midfielders are all the way up here. The ball has to go to them, or you don't lose it. And that's like the golden rule of if you're playing this with wingers and 8s, is your wingers have to retain possession or pass forward when the midfielders come up. They cannot lose it. And that kept happening over and over. The midfielders would push up, leaving huge spaces, which is okay. It's a risky way of playing, but it's a more attacking way of playing. If your wingers don't lose the ball, you have to keep it. And that's what I see. So I think that's the biggest thing, is we're playing a much more risky style, which is why we're getting cut open. But the wingers have to understand that. And the other players have to understand that too. When your midfielders are pushing up like that, when Mount's making runs in behind and Bruno's up there, and even Shaw is tucking in and pushing up, don't lose the damn ball. Just keep it or pass it forward to the runners. You cannot lose it. You cannot try to take a man on and lose it in the middle, and then, it's a wide open spaces and the gaps are insane. And we just constantly kept losing the ball when the gaps were there. And so that's my biggest takeaway. I'm not like an expert or anything, but I think that's the biggest takeaway is we are moving into a more attacking and risky style, and the decisions individually were really, really poor in those circumstances. And then the fitness was terrible. But I thought Wan-Bissaka was very good. Obviously got the goal. Again, he was making that run all day and was being unmarked. They were not marking the wide players. It's really funny. Wolves were just leaving the wide players open, and finally Bruno finds him in between the lines, and he hits a crossover to Varane, scores, and that's it. But very easily could have lost that game. And got to make better choices in the wide areas. One of the things, obviously, I think, is that Rasmus Højlund coming in and pushing Rashford to the wing make a big difference, because I think Rashford is right now our only elite level winger, and he's the only winger that I can consistently bet if he's out wide, he's going to produce and he's going to attack. I mean, if he was out wide in some of the spaces that Antony and Garnacho had, I think that's a totally different game, because nobody leaves Rashford with that much space where he's able to run at players and things like that. Nobody, because it's deadly. And that's why Rashford is elite, and that's why I prefer him in the wide areas where he can get into those spaces. But we'll see. Work in progress. I'd like to see Jadon Sancho start on either side, frankly, next week, because I think he came on and changed the game as well. Just retaining the ball, moving it around, finding passes, finding movements, and eventually resulting in the goal. I think it was a game changer. And I think that helped quite a lot. Moving on from the game, obviously, one of the things that started coming out before the game yesterday was the situation with Harry Maguire. And, obviously, United and West Ham agreed a fee last week for £30 million, but you had two issues that have been remaining, which are the severance package for Harry Maguire and a replacement. And obviously now the reports have come out overnight that West Ham are essentially walking away from the deal. If that's true or not, we'll see. Or if they actually are, if they're just threatening it. I believe they've told people that. If it's true or not, we'll see. Or if they're simply just trying to push United and Maguire forward. But here's the problem. One, United owe £9 to £10 million to Harry Maguire. He's due that money. They can't actually do anything about that if he's due that money unless he decides to forego it. Now, my opinion is, and I have said this before, I think he should be ambitious. If he wants to go play somewhere, go play, and forego some of the money and go play. I also think West Ham should be making up some of that money too. I think it's unambitious of him if the move doesn't happen because of money, but it isn't the only issue. The other big issue here is the replacement. And let's talk about the center back targets and talk about the replacement and talk about a few scenarios. First of all, Tyrell Malacia is injured. That means we have one left back, which is Luke Shaw, who has a muscle injury history. We have 4 center backs and 1 left back. So if Maguire goes and Shaw has to come into center back, we have no left back. So it leaves us very limited. Then Lisandro Martinez comes off at halftime with potentially a minor ankle injury. That means for right center back, and left back, right now we have 4 healthy players. If Maguire leaves, we have 3 players for 3 positions. Now tell me how that's supposed to work. It's impossible. And we don't even have backup goalkeepers healthy. Like, there's a mini crisis here at the moment. We have 1 goalkeeper who's healthy. Dean Henderson was on the bench, so assuming he's getting healthy and he could be there. So maybe that's okay. We have 1 goalkeeper that's healthy, and right now we have 4 players for 3 positions in the back line. And that's bad. And players who have muscle injury histories. Rafa Varane could get injured at any point in time, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say. Luke Shaw could get injured at any point in time. Lisandro Martinez is injured. This is not good. We have 4 players healthy right now. So Maguire was never going to go without replacement. And part of the issue is twofold. Number one, the price for Benjamin Pavard seems extremely high. United were looking to get him for 25 million euros, max 30 million euros. And it seems like Bayern are holding out for 45 million euros. Todibo is up in the range of, I think, 45 to 50 based on the last thing from coming out of Nice. And I think that, I don't think Jim Ratcliffe's doing United any favors on that purchase at the moment. And Tapsoba's like in the 60 million euro range. So there's a couple of things to consider here. Number one, if you look at FFP, for example, Harry Maguire was given a 6-year contract, 80 million. That means that every year of his contract, right, is worth 13.33 whatever, right? So 26 and 2/3 million pounds is what's left on his contract, amortized value. If they're selling him for 30 million pounds and making a payoff of 5, even if they negotiated it down there, they're essentially losing money or breaking even about. But they're gaining, of course, on wages that a significant amount because he's paid a lot of money, 9 million a year, something like that, right? No, do I have that right? Yeah, about 9 million a year, 9 to 10. So if they sell and they buy a player for 35 to 40 million euros and pay him wages, essentially they're going to end up breaking even is the way that it works out. You're not gaining anything. So you have to think of the center back thing as its own thing, separate to all the other potential transfers and targets. The center back situation is effectively entirely its own set of circumstances then. It's just Maguire goes, you get a replacement in. If it's in the 35 to 40 range, you basically break even. If you start going above that amount and you have to pay Maguire 10 million, you're actually losing on FFP this year. And that means you're taking money potentially from other areas where you want to make signings. So now the question becomes, are the players that are being discussed good enough to be the long-term replacements? And that's the concern that I have here, where I'm a little unconvinced by certain aspects. Is Benjamin Pavard the future guy who's going to push Varane to rotation? Is he that good? I don't think so. So if you buy him, he's a stopgap that may prevent you from buying someone next year. Are you better off waiting a year with Maguire as a backup, selling him next summer? You could sell him for 15 million then. It doesn't matter. It's no different. Selling him next year and for 15 million, it's the same thing because of the amortization. When you have more budget available and you can focus on a center back, because let's look at it. If we can handle another midfielder this year, next summer, really, we probably need to sign 1 or 2 center backs, plus maybe another midfielder, and not much else. Maybe depending on the winger situation with Ahmad and all of these players. So next year, the job doesn't seem that big in terms of signings if we can get a midfielder this year. So point being, you don't want to start taking money away from the midfield in order to sign a center back if that center back is not the long-term replacement. So I think this is a part of the considerations that are coming into play here, which is, can a replacement be brought in that is of sufficient quality, I should say, without spending that's going to take our ability to buy from other things? It's messy. The center back situation is its own thing, but they don't want to spend so much money that it takes from anywhere else. And it has to be a quality of player that is likely good enough or cheap enough that they're actually gaining, like if they were to buy Pavard for 20, 25 million, where they'd actually be gaining on FFP and enhancing their ability to spend elsewhere. It's complicated. It's all the factors that go into it. I'm not saying this has been handled perfectly, okay? Because it seems clear that they should be replacing the center back. But if this is the point, and you were to ask me, would I rather keep Maguire for a year and next year buy like a Silva from Portugal, and this year get another good midfielder in, I know what my answer would be. If you were to say, would you rather get Pavard or Todibo in this year, but it may reduce our ability to sign someone in the midfield, I wouldn't want to do that. That's my opinion. It's complicated. We're going to have to see how it plays out. But that is, I think, a big part of what's going on. In terms of the midfield itself, obviously, we're talking yesterday about Amadou Onana. There's some reports, obviously, that United haven't yet started talking to him and things like that. And that is all technically all correct. It is a name that United are looking at. It's a name that United are interested in. It's a name that, as I've said, United are thinking about. But right now, it's still in the considering phase. Not that they're not looking at things. Like I said, Onana, Thuram. Obviously, Amrabat is still the most likely player, but they haven't moved on this yet. And the thing we don't know is, do they need to shift Van de Beek, or do they need to get another sale like potentially Alvaro Fernandez as a youth player? Even if he goes for 7 million euros with a buyback, that's going to fund an entire transfer for United on FFP because it's pure profit. So there's variables here that we don't necessarily know because nobody has that much level of access to United's financial decision making. But it seems like we're a little bit stuck where they're considering, can we go big? But I think it feels like something needs to happen now for that. And it may be Van de Beek. It may be they want Van de Beek and McTominay to go before going big. So we're just going to have to watch it kind of day by day. And one of the things about this, but I know that they are prioritizing something here. I think they're prioritizing something here even over the center back situation right now. And that may be the factor that they don't want to potentially do anything at center back that could cost them in the midfield signing department area from a financial standpoint. And that brings me to this Everton friendly, because I have strong indications that a part of this is to put some players in the shop window, potentially for Everton, but there are also potentially scouts and people from other clubs that would be watching. United are gauging further interest in McTominay. They're gauging further interest in Harry Maguire. They're gauging further interest in Anthony Martial, because that would be a huge FFP shift moving him off, as well as helping to give them some fitness and things like that. Gauging interest in Donny van de Beek, but also the youth. Hannibal is playing, needs a loan. He's not playing for the youth side, and he wasn't named in the team. That means they want to get him somewhere, potentially get a fee for him. Not a sale, but like a loan fee. And that would help a little bit, but it's also getting him somewhere. Maybe it helps create another deal or open the talks for something else. Dan Gore, these types of players, Alvaro Fernandez. There's a lot of players here that could be potential money raisers for United that people are going to want to see a little bit more of. And I think that's what they're trying to do, is really work on how can we get more interest in the players that we have to start moving something. Because if they can sell Alvaro Fernandez for a deal, which it looks like they're closing in on, potentially to Spain, for 7 million, that's going to fund that midfield purchase. They're going to be able to make a midfield purchase on that signing, and maybe a significant one. If they can move him and Donny, well, that's another maybe 40, 50 million in availability in FFP for a purchase this summer. And so then maybe, you could go big if that's what they decide to do. So it's kind of messy hours where the plan is a little less clear, because there's 2 weeks left and a lot is kind of flying in at the same time on what's happening. But these are the kind of all the considerations I would keep in mind, is the center back thing with Maguire and the issues there, the midfield and the targets, and trying to, I think right now, what it looks like is resolve some outs. And as soon as they resolve some outs, make a move on an in. I know they're still in contact with it. I know for a fact that they're having talks or explorations with representatives or intermediaries regarding players in the midfield. But they are kind of figuring out what they can do in terms of outs, because there's still a lot of players that need to go that could help enhance how much they can spend this summer. And as I understand it, they really are planning on doing quite a bit more. That was the plan, but they need these outs. And in some cases, like with Maguire, they need a replacement of suitable cost. And if that's not going to happen, then it becomes not worthwhile. But I know they're still looking at goalkeepers. I know they're still looking at a midfield signing, potentially 2 or a bigger one. And I know they're looking at the under 21 market as well to make signings in some key areas for players that could push into the first team over the next year or two. So day by day, I keep doing these videos. One of the reasons for a while I wasn't doing daily is it's hard to come up with stuff every day and to have stuff every day to talk about. But so I don't have a huge amount of solid info today. I can only keep kind of updating on where things are at, but I hope that's still, beneficial. And I'll cover whatever news comes out and anything that I hear. And I'll keep working on it, but it is like stuff does happen every day. It's just, sometimes it's very minor. So Anyway, that's what I have for this video. It's a long one, but thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and I'll see you in the next one.